You know, a dream is like a river, ever changing as it flows. And a dreamer's just a vessel that must follow where it goes, trying to learn from what's behind, and never knowing what's in store. Makes each day a constant battle, just to stay between the shore. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Maxwell Ivy, known around the world as the Blind Blogger. And this is another episode of What's Your Excuse, where I'm going to try to help you overcome the excuses that are holding you back by sharing conversations with people who have overcome adversity, thrived in spite of difficult life circumstances, struck out on their own and created a new unusual business, or who have real world tested advice to help you take action and accomplish your own goals. And of course, I will also have on people who I personally like, respect, or would just like to have a conversation with if I think they will benefit you. You can find the podcast at theblindblogger.net. You can also find the show now at wyexcuse.com, along with the other podcasts on the Y Network. I'm on Apple and Stitcher. You can also tell Alexa and Google, hey, play What's Your Excuse? So I do hope you will check out the podcast, listen to some of my past guests, and hopefully be entertained, educated, and inspired by them. I also hope that you will visit our sponsor, which is Blueberry, BLUBRRY.com. They are providing the hosting sponsoring for the podcast and the network. And really, wouldn't be able to do this without their financial and technical support. I will include an affiliate link to Blueberry in the show notes so that if you're considering starting a podcast, you can get off on the right foot with some great people over there. That's at blueberry.com. And as they tell me, when they first started, they couldn't afford the E, if that helps you remember it. So today, I have another great guest. And in fact, one of my first guests in several months. I have to admit to y'all that while I did my best to keep going after my laptop broke, trying to do things with just my tablet and my phone, I did get a little bit behind. I failed to schedule new guests, and I have a few great interviews y'all haven't heard yet because of it. But the best thing we could do is just start again and do better. Just like to be honest with y'all, today my guest is Jenna Ashlyn, and she is a writer, graduated from University of Rio Grande and Marshall University. Those are a couple of very fine institutions here in Texas. She's won awards for her writing. She's done 2 books so far. The first one is called uh, Into, Into the Gray. It's about a woman who's trying to deal with life after becoming a widow at a young age. And her most recent book, which just dropped in a few days, like in the last 2 or 3 days, it's very exciting to have a new book, called Sheila's Men, which is a fictionalized account, or what we call creative nonfiction, of 10 years or of her life in a marriage where she suffered abuse and also unwanted attention at work. And the books are designed to help other people who are going through difficult times like hers so that they'll hopefully reach out and get some help. And in fact, she works with an organization called Survivors Advocacy Outreach Program. And while I was waiting to go live with y'all, she actually had a call from one of her clients. Now, obviously, we can't go into that, but it was really cool to see one of my guests at work. Y'all can find Jenna Ashlyn on Amazon, on Facebook, on Twitter, and I believe I'm going to have to get her to correct me on the website. I believe the website is jennaashlyn.com. So I do hope that y'all will give a warm welcome. Jenna, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and please feel free to correct me wherever I've got anything wrong.
All right, so I will start with that. The University of Rio Grande is in Ohio, and I actually studied there for 2 years before I got married and started a family, and I really didn't have the funding to continue. Later on, more recently, I studied at Marshall University, and that is in West Virginia. There's actually a movie out about them called We Are Marshall, and I haven't had the opportunity to graduate, mostly just because of funding, and that's pretty much it. But
Well, you can't blame a
yeah,
Texan.
today's is interesting.
Yeah. Well, you can't blame a Texan. He hears Rio Grande and assumes it's home. Um,
Yeah, I hear that.
so, as I've learned a little bit about you, the one question that just keeps coming back to me, and oh yeah, I forgot to tell people that in a few months you're actually getting married after this journey that you've been on. So, congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. So the one question that keeps coming back to me is just how do you keep going? Where does that strength come from? That I think you call it quiet strength or elegant strength in the description of the book. Where does that come from? How do you just keep doing that?
It's I don't know a good answer. I mean, that's not a good answer, but I think it's determination, I'm like, there for a while I was like a wounded animal determined to live. Like there was a time whenever I really didn't want to because I didn't see a way out and I became very suicidal. But, just kind of, maybe it's my kids, maybe it's hope, you know, just that not wanting to give up. Just there's this inner fight in me that is going to do the extra work, is going to go the extra mile. And, I tend to look outside of myself and realize, not everything is about me. My story that I was writing, I just was kind of like a coping mechanism, and then it just wasn't anymore, and it became about, hey, this book could really help people, because there's not a lot out there that really details like people's experiences and gets into the mind of the person going through it. That way you kind of understand from their perspective why they do the things that they do, and when they don't recognize the abuse at first and then start it, and just that fight and that determination to want to get out and want to survive.
Okay, so you said you just wanted to keep going. So is there anything in your past or your upbringing that taught you to be that kind of a person to start with?
Yeah, probably. I grew very poor. I had a very determined grandmother, and she's like this person. Actually, writing about her in a book that I'm about halfway through writing it right now. And she was this. She has a story all her own, and she was from the coal fields of West Virginia. And she had to quit school when she was in like fifth or sixth grade, and so she could stay home and take care of their kids because she was the oldest daughter. And whenever she grew up, she moved to Ohio with her husband, and she started working at the hospital as a nurse's aide. And before long, she started just kind of soaking everything up. And now, mind you, she only had a sixth grade education, never graduated high school. I mean, that's it. And she just soaked up all the knowledge and information and didn't give up. And so they actually waived the classes and stuff and allowed her to take the test to be an LPN in the state. And she like graduated. She had like one of the top scores in the state, and then she did it again and became an RN. So this little old woman from the cold West Virginia went from a sixth grade education to to being a registered nurse. And so with that kind of comes, in our family, a lot of very strong, very determined women.
All right. And it's I would have thought that growing up in poverty like that, it might be difficult to see yourself as successful or being or ever being financially well off. Does poverty is poverty cyclical? Just like sometimes abuse is cyclical. I mean, obviously you're making a success in your life, but I imagine there are a lot of people who grew up where she grew up who their family is still stuck in that we're going to have 10 kids and we're going to work for the coal mine and that's all we're ever going to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in my local community too. There's just like status quo that, you are where you are and you just accept it. And for some reason, I was just never like that. I was never okay with just being part of the pack, so to speak. My fiance says there's always one, and I'm that one. And so he came from was over. I guess there's two, but that
Well,
wants
it's
to stand out. That isn't. No, that's kind of against the grain, and I've always been like that. So
right. Now, your when people read your books, how much would you tell them is fiction, and how much would you tell them is real experiences that are just being shared under other names and locations for legal purposes?
um, for Within the Gray, like only the first few chapters are about 50 to 75% real. Within the Gray, kind of like what should have happened and what I wish would have had after my husband died. All stuff around my husband that died is actually 100% accurate. Um, but the rest of it is not so much. The rest of it's kind of metaphorical. And you don't know that's happening if you're reading the book. Although there are some scenes, because Gray is actually a place, because she goes through like this series of psychological dreams and visions that kind of mirror what's happened to her in real life, and it's really an interesting book. But there's a lot of metaphors and like combined events within the Gray. However, Sheila's Mint is like 90% accurate, and it is for legal purposes that I changed names, descriptions, some locations, and like some of the habits and things like that to kind of not get sued. So
One of these days I'm actually going to have to think about things like that when I write. I have a good friend named Cassie who's like, whenever she introduces me to people, she'll tell them two things. If she tells them nothing else, she'll tell them two things. One, Max is a writer. And two, be careful what you say because you might end up in his next book.
right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, how difficult was it to write about these things? I mean, because you've written two, what I would imagine are very emotionally challenging books for you as the author.
um The first one took years because I was literally writing it to myself, emails while I was working. Like whenever I'd get lunch breaks or something like that, I'd pull up like the tablet or something. I'd punch in my email address and I would just kind of write. And I didn't have like Microsoft Word or anything like that. So that's how to do things. And so it took years. Sheila's Men happened in 6 months, maybe less. And it just kind of poured out of me like water. Once I got to that point, like I wrote the first couple of pages like years before, and then I just set it to the side because like I was still going through it and I didn't know what it would really become yet. But I knew that those first few pages were like really powerful and I really felt them. And then I started writing in a journal. It was part of my healing process, writing in this journal. And there was like two things that kind of combined together, and I changed it to first person perspective and I got real honest and it just came. And it was crazy. It was crazy how fast it came, but it was extremely difficult. I went through like a lot of tissues and paper towels and toilet paper and whatever I had on hand, you know what I'm saying? And I mean, it was definitely an interesting process because I had to learn about myself and um, some parts that were really, really hard to write are not the ones that you think are hard to write at all. And that was really surprising to me because a lot of the stuff I had dealt with, this just kind of helped me recognize my own patterns, and it helped a lot with the healing process. But whenever I got to the parts, there's one part in the book where Prince Charming finally shows up. I'm going through this healing process. So whenever that part came, like I called him into the room. We broke open a bottle of wine, and we kind of celebrated a little bit. I was like, "Yay, you finally here!" Because I could write about the good things too. So that was really nice.
Right. So let's look a little bit at the chronology here. How old were you and your first husband when you lost him and became a widow?
I was 30 years old when I became a widow.
Right. So, and a lot of people would think, maybe 30 isn't young, but when you lose somebody that close to you, it's always too soon. Yes.
Well, yes, that's very true. A lot of the times when people think widows, think of someone in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, at a much older than say 30 years old, whenever you're really just starting your life and you have little children, so it's kind of a completely different situation, but just such a devastating loss because that life that you thought you were going to have has been taken away.
Right. And how long do you believe the it took you to grieve over that loss before you continued on in your life?
I didn't really get the opportunity to grieve that loss because men were kind of coming out from everywhere, and um I kind of needed a friend or something. I wasn't really in my right mind. The only thing that I knew was like all these guys are coming around. I don't feel safe, and I need to kind of deflect them as much as possible. So I made a friend, and I told him, "Hey, I'm not ready for a relationship or anything like that, but hey, let's hang out, let's get to know each other." Kind of a situation, and because I just wanted somebody around so that all the other guys would start leaving me alone. And he wouldn't go away. And at first, he respected that I wasn't ready for a relationship, but all in all, he really did not. He kept pushing and pushing and wearing me down. And eventually, he kind of convinced me that, hey, this is, and so my thought process went to, hey, this is a really guy. I should give him a chance. It's not his fault that, I'm not ready. I shouldn't let him go. And so I ended up in a relationship and eventually ended up marrying him. And he became my abuser, and I wasn't allowed to mourn. And that's kind of why I started writing Within the Gray in the first place, because I was using it as a way to cope and to mourn and remember my husband had passed away. And it was a way for me to imagine like the decisions that I should have made. And that was part of my growth and healing. And I'd say about halfway through the relationship with my abuser is whenever I realized everything that was going on and started hatching a plan to try to get out.
Okay. All right. And so eventually you did leave him. Uh, and I think in your book you mentioned that it was 10 years of physical and sexual and psychological abuse.
Uh, yes, about years.
And how, I mean, how do you survive something like that and then eventually get out of it? Or how did
I
you at
was
least?
wore down, like really. I was really tired, and he wouldn't go to work or anything. He completely refused until I told him that, I wasn't going to support him anymore. Like right when I was getting out is whenever he got a job. And um he refused completely at that point. And I had to I think my kids kept going because I have 3 kids, and they were quite young at the time, so I wanted to give them a good life, so I worked a lot, and that kind of robbed me of a lot of time with them, but it also allowed me to be able to find a way out. So I kind of just turned it off whenever I could. Like I kind of ignored it. And there's all these mind games and stuff that they abusers can use against you, to where you think you're the problem and you get mental health. And I got a lot of therapy and just started to grow. And as I was right within the gray, it kind of gave me the strength. And the time that I did get to spend with my kids, it became about them, or just focus on my job. um it was really hard. It's kind of, I guess, that inner drive in me that came from my grandmother was there, just refusing to give up.
Right. And if I understand it, um, even while you were married, you also had some pressure from men at work. Is that correct?
Yes, at one point, I ended up in an open marriage because he wanted that, because I was gone all the time at work. And he kept insisting, pushing for it. And I think for me, that's whenever like everything stopped. Like that's when, like, mentally, our marriage was over for me. I just couldn't get him out of the house because he refused to leave. And I owned my own home, 3 kids. There was nowhere for me to go. There was no shelter. There was no room in the shelters. No family members or anything that I could to. So I ended up in an open relationship. So my abuser would like post things online and insist that I do all these acts and stuff. And I was literally like hiding at work because I was working far from home in a big city, and like I had guys everywhere. And um my district manager wasn't like one of the best people, because he made me work a lot harder for you know my position and my promotion, than what he did the others, because the others would have coffee with him and they'd run up and give him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And I was very personal, and I just went up and I shook his hand. And there was so much flirtation, everything going on in the workplace, that, I mean, it's ridiculous. There was a drastic difference between how he treated the ones that would openly flirt with him, compared to how he treated me.
Okay. And was there one specific event that led you to finally divorce him and get out?
um a lot of that kind of like around my kids, and he would fit with them. And there was one time, like, he pushed my daughter really hard and she ended up on the floor and all the kids started crying. And the and that's like the straw broke the camel's back. And I told him, I was like, you're going to have to work on these things. You're going to have to make a difference. You're going to have to do better. We work on this relationship for a while, because I didn't want to just give up, because part of me was still wondering, hey, is this my fault? I've been married a few times. I can't keep doing this. And um, the way he's treating kids, pushed around, was just not okay. And I'd had enough, because I would work the time, and then at home, all I ever heard was arguing, him and the kids. Because I think that was when I was like, okay, listen, you're out. I'm done. I'm going to go out. I'm going to find a way to get the paperwork and stuff, and you're getting out. But he didn't leave until the day of the divorce, whenever it was final, and he was assaulting me almost every day, up to the very, very end.
And during this time period, was there no attempt at any intervention from the authorities?
There was one time that the police were called. The instance that I mentioned with my daughter, um, she called someone else and kind of let them know what was going on, and the police showed up. And he was like standing on the other side of the door whenever the police officer asked me, because so he's like standing on the other side of the door. He could see me like a little bit in my reaction stuff. And the officers, is everything okay here? And I kind of explained what happened and stuff, and he's like, do you feel safe? And like and the thing is, they're going to arrest or question somebody, because he was very nonchalant. The officer that came to the house was, and what didn't really seem to be taking it seriously. He's just like, so is everybody okay here? And I had a choice but to say yes, because if I said no or said that I was scared, that they're just gonna pull him out there, ask him for a couple of questions, and then he's just gonna end up, still in my house, or at best he's gonna be gone for like a day. And then what am I going to do? He's going to get more violent. And that's like a very dangerous situation that law enforcement doesn't really help a lot with. I had made calls to a crisis center too about marital rape, and they said that it was basically my word against his, and the community that I'm in is not big enough to the hospital isn't big enough to afford the nurses and stuff to be trained for rape kits. So there was literally nothing that I could do.
I see. And then after you finally divorced him, how long was it before you got to the point where you could start dating or having friendships with men at that point?
I actually friends well before that, because we were in an open relationship for a couple of years, one that I kept shutting down, and then he would kind of beg his way back into it. But during time, I did make a friend. So we mentally were broke up and split up at that point, and that's whenever I started like the healing process and starting to learn myself. And I would tell him that I was going on dates just so I could go down by the river and spend a little time journaling and being without him, and getting a chance to kind of work myself and do things that I wanted to do. So the process began well, long before then. And there's this guy who kept coming into the store, and um, he he and I would just have like really good discussions about relationships, psychology, and mental health, and just a lot of really in-depth, deep conversations. And like neither one of us wanted to be in any kind of relationship, and neither one of us trusted like people of the opposite sex. But it was like a year that he and I were just friends and would talk occasionally, and then we became, whenever things got really intense with me getting rid of my abuser, we became close friends, and we remained close friends for another 6 months. And then even though we tried not to, like feelings and stuff started to naturally develop. And he's actually a psychology student, and he's getting ready to graduate. And he kind of helped me through a lot of it, and he had some healing and stuff that he needed to do as well. So it kind of both ways. And slowly over the course of like a year to develop feelings that we couldn't really resist. So it wasn't long after the divorce before we ended up in a relationship, but it was a very slow careful, both of us communicating very deeply and openly, but at the same time, um, I'd been in the healing process and separated from my husband for a couple years before. So that's kind of a tricky question. So
Well, there are very few questions where the answer is television easy?
that's true.
Yeah. So for some of this time, you were being forced to be part of an open marriage by your husband at that time. That's not something I've run ever met anybody who had experienced. Is uh, what is your opinion of people who say that they could do that? I mean, because there are people who claim to be doing it voluntarily.
Um, it's not my place to judge them. I know that it was a situation that wasn't good for me, but I can't. Yeah, for me, I've been there, I've done that. I bought the t-shirt and I returned said t-shirt, but I can't judge that lifestyle and how they live. If that's the way um, their relationship works and that they're happy and they're both willing to be in that situation, then that's their choice, and it's not my play to judge on that.
Fair enough. And then I was this one. I was wanting to get your comment on something that I heard recently. Uh, Drew Barrymore over the last week has gotten a lot of attention because she's talked about how she doesn't know how to date as a single mother with young daughters. Um, Going through everything you've been through, how has that been with you and your? You have one daughter that's part of a set of twins, and then you have another one who's 15. How is that? If you're okay with speaking about
Um, yeah, fine speaking of it. I don't know that my situation is cool because I never had any trouble um at all. I mean, it's hard to kind of balance being a mother, starting a new relationship because if you're dating and stuff, if you want to bring somebody home, you can't really do that. But um I don't know. I guess I don't get it because there's always a way around situations, and you don't bring kids to a date. And I don't know how old her kids are or anything, but a lot of people do talk about how hard it is to date it as a single mom, but it really doesn't have to be. You can get babysitters and go out on dates and stuff like that, but you have to be careful. And there's a lot of guys out there that don't really care if mom or not, or kind of expect you to. So um maybe it's a little, maybe they're limiting themselves, I guess. But like, I don't want to be offensive or anything, but some people have a hard time with it. I certainly didn't have any difficulties at all. At any point in my life, it was like never really an issue. But maybe that's, because I live in a small community, and guys kind of expect that. Maybe they're just not looking in the right places.
it? Okay. All right. I am speaking with Jennifer Ashlyn. She's an author. Her latest book, She Was Men, just came out this week. She works at the support advocacy outreach program in Ohio, helping other women who are suffering abuse. And we've been having a good conversation here. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your writing. I loved how you said that when you didn't have time to write, you would send yourself an email. So, what are some of the other things besides the emails and the journaling that you've used in order to share your story in book form?
A lot of the ways that I would be able to keep writing is by I have playlists and music I listen that I listen to a lot that will kind of jog my memory and kind of put me in the spot that I need to be. Because when I really writing, it's almost like a trance-like state, and um, like it's very hard to pull out of that. It's very hard to get there sometimes, depending on what's going on. But I think music is probably one of the number one things that I use to kind of get me ready to write.
And what was that? What is the thing that helps you get
Music is
into
one
that?
of the, yeah.
I must have missed something. What is the thing that helps you get into that mindset so that you can write?
Music.
Music.
I listen to
Okay.
a lot of music, and I have a lot of like YouTube playlists that I work with that kind of puts me in the space I need to be.
Okay. And what are some of the songs on the playlist you use when you're trying to write?
It depends on what book I'm writing. They all have like main songs. Um, for With the Gray, it was Sound of Silence by Disturbed, the remake version. That was the big one hit. Um, Sheila's Men is probably Breath of Life. It's from uh, Florence and the Machine, I think. On one of the Snow White movies soundtracks. So it was
Okay.
a big one for that. And then I'm working on two books right now, and the main songs for those is for one of my childhood that includes some of my grandmother's story is Return to Innocence by Enigma. And the other one is Janie's Got It Done. It's going to be a really fun book. So,
All right. And then you are published with a traditional publishing company. Is that correct?
yes, Sheila's Men does have a traditional publisher called Van Rye Publishing, and they have really spent a lot of money and effort to invest in this book, and they feel that it is timeless and needs to be heard and needs to be read. So I'm very blessed to have them in my corner, and they have been a wonderful support.
Yeah, that's very encouraging because I have a lot of friends who are authors, and I've read many posts about publishing companies that sign authors and release books, but depend more on the author than on themselves to generate the sales. That not a lot of marketing being put behind books from some of the traditional publishers. So that's very encouraging.
I think that it kind of goes ways. I mean, going to do for in my instance, they have a certain um they're investing a lot in the marketing, and I'm really happy what they're doing. And they have like a complete plan, so I know exactly what they're doing. But an author needs to do their part too. So it kind of really does go both ways.
And did they reach out to you, or did you find them?
I found them. I actually submitted, tried agents at first, but it's kind of controversial material. And they told me that I had very detailed rejection letters, lots of them. And they said, I just don't think that I can represent this because it's so controversial, because it is so honest. And they would say, that it's very powerful and it needs to be heard. They just weren't up to the challenges. And then so I started submitting it to small publishers. And whenever I did that, I actually had four publishers offer me traditional contracts. And I went with Van Rye just simply because they seem the most passionate about the work.
I see. Is that Van Roy or Van Rye?
Van Rye, Rye, Vanrye.
Okay. I'll be sure to get people their website so that anybody interested in the book can support you as well. Um, and approximately how many letters did you send out? I mean, how many rejections are we talking about before you finally started getting these responses back that they were interested in publishing?
I think I sent it to 50 or 75, somewhere around in there, agents that
Wow.
rejected it. Yeah. And that was on my second round. So altogether, probably 100, because I start out, doing, okay, I'm going to do this as fiction, so I don't have to say that it's a true story. And then I just kind of stopped, and I took a break, and I did some soul searching and took care of some legal stuff. That way there'd be some legal documentation. And I did a police report and was very thorough. And I filed for a protection order, which I lost, and which made no sense at all, because I had like screenshots where he had threatened me, and I had all of this evidence. But just because I was helping like his most recent victim, and there was a situation where they caught us together and they took pictures, and they said that because I was talking to her that it destroyed my credibility. And I'm like, okay, that makes no sense, but it's great for my cause, because I can literally show physical proof that like these people are not here to help as much as they should be. And I think a lot of change needs to happen. But whenever I got all that done and I sat down, my fiance is like, you don't try, if you're not doing anything, then you know not making any steps, nothing changed. So I started sending it to small publishers, because you don't have to have an agent to have something traditionally published. And I started sending it out, and it was within a week. Within a week, it was up. So it
Okay,
happened very fast.
so small publishers, regional publishers, university presses, less likely to require you to have an agent in order to reply to a query letter.
Yes, there's quite a few book places out there. Used to be really cautious of what you're doing. My particular company, for aspiring authors, it's a good company, because they do editorial services, and they do hybrid publishing where people can pay. I was very fortunate that they were able to invest fully in mine, and I didn't have to pay for anything. And they're standing behind me with this book, and they have invested the editorial staff, and the cover design, and adding all of those things did for me. And I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to pay, because again, they made an investment in Sheila's Men, and I'm very proud of that.
Right. But it sounds like you went in eyes wide open. And for anybody who doesn't understand, there are basically three kinds of publishing. There's self-publishing, where you do it on your own and you pay all your expenses. There's traditional publishing, where they decide to invest in an author and they provide the editing and the cover art and do the research and do the promotion. And then there's a third group, what are generally referred to as vanity publishing, which is basically where you pay somebody to do all the work, but there's generally not a guarantee of promotion on the back end. So you will have a finished book. You will be able to show people you're a published author, but it's generally fairly expensive. And from what I've heard, more expensive than just traditionally self-publishing, doing all the work yourself. So it's one of those things you have to be aware of when you're querying people, is to make sure that they are actually investing in you and not, wanting you to invest thousands in them.
Absolutely true. My first book, Within the Gray, was, they call hybrid or vanity presses, and that's what they were. Although they say that they're selective, they're really, I don't think. But I went through, um, I'm just being honest. But I went into that eyes wide open because they were offering me, they're going to do all this stuff. I have to pay, but it's going to through like 3 different editorial phases. And, they're going to do all the stuff. And so I went ahead and invested in that, like knowing what was going on, because at that point I was already writing Sheila's Men and I wanted to focus on it. And I used it as a learning experience so I could learn, kind of behind the scenes of what it was like to publish and work with editors and work with designers. And everything was done professionally. And I actually went through and edited the book again right before it went to print so I could make sure that everything was as good as I could make it. So I used it as a learning experience, and that really helped me grow as an author. So if you're
Right.
aware of what
Plus,
you're doing, it's a whole lot different than being hoodwinked.
yeah. And the other thing that you can always look at it if you want is you can see that book, that first book, Into the Gray, the Vanity published for shorthand purposes, also gives you some credibility when you starting writing those query letters for Sheila's Men. I imagine you have more confidence in yourself because you have the work out there, and it kind of sends a message to the traditional publishers that you know what it's going to take in order to get a book from first draft to finished book actually out there on the shelf somewhere.
Yes. I mean, they want a lot of sales. So like for that to matter a whole lot, but it does show consistency whenever you're starting to quit about the next book. And whenever you're starting to build that reputation up, because it's not just one book, oh, this is my first book, because now they know that you can consistently release books. So I'm at about one a year. There was a slight delay on Sheila's Men just because I freaked out for a second. Um, but so it shows consistency and it shows like growth, and agents are very interested in that. I don't have an agent yet, and depending on how it goes with the small press, I'm not sure that I'm going to be overly concerned about that.
Right. Well, whether or not you need an agent generally comes down to what your goals are for your future writing. I mean, if your goal is Hollywood blockbuster based on your books, then you probably need an agent. But if your goal is to publish about one book a year, to change people's lives, and to receive a reasonable amount of income doing it, then you probably don't need an agent.
Exactly. We'll see what happens.
And who knows, an agent may come along that has seen the books. So, and that's the really difficult thing, isn't it? When you're doing stuff like this, whether it's creating a book, a podcast, a film, you really have to tell yourself that it's a process. I mean, you really have to let go of immediate gratification, immediate rewards if you're going to do something like this, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. I was just talking to my managing editor yesterday or the day before, because we're not really ranking. I mean, we're ranking in the top 100 and some categories and top 50 and some categories on, which is where the initial release happened and available about this. But he said, you know what, it's not sprint, it's a marathon. You got this. This is a timeless book. It's going to take some time. It may not sell a whole lot in the beginning, but it's probably going to pick up steam and still be very successful. He was very encouraged, and that was nice. So.
Yeah, and I personally think it's sad that the only rankings that seem to matter for most people are the rankings immediately after a book is published. I have a really good friend named Adriana Gavazzoni, who's an author of legal thrillers from Brazil. And what is it, 2 months back, her first novel from like 6 years ago got rediscovered and was an Amazon bestseller. It's
Yeah,
yeah. So
it's
uh,
you never really know what's going to happen.
no, you don't. You just have to continue to do the work, and sometimes it's difficult to have that faith. And you mentioned having an editor. That must be really helpful, knowing you have people who've been through the process and who are encouraging you, which is something uh, everybody should be trying to find and have in their life. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I
Absolutely. I
imagine you're.
have good.
Yeah, I imagine your fiance was your first real encouraging person when it came to your writing.
Yeah, he doesn't really like to read though, but so he hasn't read them. He knows he knows the gist of it, but he's a very creative person too, and he's ready to graduate with his psychology degree, and he's also a musician, and but he's very supportive and very encouraging for me to be able to reach out to people because we both want to help people, and we both want to do what we can to make a positive impact on the world. We're just kind of doing it from different angles, and so he's very supportive and he's very loving, and whenever I was having really bad days, whenever I was writing, he was there to kind of to fall on to, and safe place to land.
Yeah. Well, since he's a musician, maybe they'll let him play on the audiobook.
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned that after you had been preaching the book for a while, you addressed some of the legal issues by filing a police report and trying to get a restraining order. So is that something that the agents told you needed to do, or is that just something you figured out on your own? And what was that process like?
Uh, oh, and that's just what I decided to do just because I wanted some kind of documentation in case he had to say anything. And, you know, I wanted to live that experience because, how am I going to help people and step against sexual assault and domestic violence if I wasn't brave enough to follow the report and do those things myself? And, part of it was about the book, but part of it was how can I, walk with someone who is going through that process if I haven't been through it myself? And so it was a lot of overcoming fears and things that I felt that I need to do, um, both for advocacy and helping other people, and to feel like I could release story as it is, which is based on a true story.
Okay. And the women that you generally work with at the Survivors Advocacy Outreach Program, what would you say are the main reasons why many of them have difficulty getting help from an agency like the one you work at?
Um, well, I just volunteered kind of far away from them. I think a lot of women are just afraid. Um, a lot of people that I work with are actually more through social media than through the SA, the Survivor Advocacy Outreach Program. And so I work with a lot of people more on a personal individual basis than I do with them. It's kind of a balance of both. And a lot of the times they don't feel safe, and they're not sure where to go. They're not sure who to talk to, and they're afraid people won't believe their story. And what's really sad about that is, people tend to say a lot at, oh, she's just lying or making up to get attention or cause trouble. But the statistics is less 2% people that say that they have sexually assaulted, less than 2% are lying. So that means like most people are telling the truth, and most of them get accused of lying.
Okay. Um, there's a lot of conversation out there about getting out of a comfort zone, and a lot of I've often wondered if part of the part of this, part of what goes on is we can become comfortable with anything, no matter how painful it is, because the alternative can always be scarier.
Yeah. Um, a lot of women abusers become most violent whenever you're trying to escape. That's when people are in danger of losing their lives. And um, it can be very dangerous, but it can be done. But people need to realize that, the whole, well, why didn't you just leave? Probably because they're afraid of dying. And maybe you should talk to, people need to talk to each other with a little more sensitivity and understanding and realize that it's a whole lot more to it than just being hit. A lot of mental and psychological abuse is very real and unfortunately isn't taken very seriously.
And unfortunately, we don't do a good job of dealing with mental health and mental illness in the U.S. Period, much less with the area of abuse on women or abuse on spouses, because there's still a lot of outdated beliefs as far as how that happens.
Yes, that's very true.
Okay, so what are some of the? I know you can't give people advice. I don't want to get you in any legal trouble. But what are some things you've seen that have worked for people in the past who are at that point where they're ready to face that fear, possibly the fear even of death, in order to get out?
Um, you really do need support from other people. It's good to have someone to talk to. And, as far as advice, I would definitely say that groups, you got to find your people. And if you have to do it on your own, then you need to find the safest way possible to do that. And I do tend to give just personal advice and things of that nature. And I think the healing process is often overlooked and people aren't talking about it very much because a lot of women after or men have gone through sexual assault and abuse, they don't know what to do to heal and they try therapy, but therapy really isn't enough because you're seeing them like once or twice a month. If you're lucky, you can do a little more, but the therapist only sees like this little window of the things um that they're told, and that's not the full story. And what I recommend is for people not to be afraid to be triggered, because a lot of people are, and it's whenever you're triggered and those emotions are raw that you kind of need to document that. I recommend Sheila's Men is a great tool for that. I've talked to several people who are using as a tool. But whenever you get triggered, either by book or maybe it's a TV show or a song that you hear, it's really important to, get out your journal and write down what you feel and just let it out. Everything that you feel, your self doubt, your loathing, you know, everything that you're experiencing in that moment, and just kind of let it go. Allow yourself to feel those emotions. And then whenever, you're out of that moment and you start to feel a little bit better, you're not in that traumatizing, triggering point, it's important to go back and read through it and kind of see if you see any patterns and start to ask yourself why and start really digging deep. And that's how you can kind of help yourself heal. And then that's something that you can take to your therapist and they can work with you. And that's a tool to kind of dig deeper, to dig out those roots and those old habits that you get used to so you can live a fulfilling and beautiful life after trauma. And I think that's so important that people realize that there is hope. I was living in hell for a long time and now I lead a beautiful, very hopeful life. And I am hoping that I can give that to other people.
Okay, so you've gone from being widowed at a young age to being in a relationship where you were abused to finally getting out of that to being in a happy relationship now and about to be married, what are some of the things that you feel like the most important things that you've learned through all these experiences that you can share with other people who are are living through their own trials, regardless of what the cause of those may be?
I think it's important to realize that, there is hope on the other side of this. You can get out. It is possible, and there's a much better life out there for you. I think that healing, really focusing on healing and getting through that trauma and realizing that there's hope on the other side. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't have to die to find it. Life is much more beautiful on the other side, and I think it's so important for people to realize that, to have that drive to realize I can do this. You can do this. Find people you can reach out to. There are support groups on Facebook. I'm in a lot of those, and sometimes, if a story resonates with me, and I kind of contact those people. Contact someone, get out, do your journaling, dig deep. The process is so important to be able to help you live the better life that you're dreaming of. And it does exist, and you can get there.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experiences and spending some time with me today. So, y'all, this is Jenna Ashlyn, and so that I make sure we get them correct. Would you please give out your website, your social media links to people, and
Um, you can Google author Jenna Ashlyn, and you should be able to find on Facebook. So it's face.com, author Jenna Ashlyn. I used to have a website, but I haven't really been maintaining that. I've just kind of been sticking with social media, but you can find an email list on social media that will help keep in contact. But I'm also on Twitter under Jenna Ashlyn1, and then on Instagram it is Jenna Ashel. So I couldn't get the YN at the end of that. So I'm not that hard to find,
all right.
but I am out there. So if anybody has any questions or anything like that, please reach to me, and I would be more than happy to help any way I can.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that people do follow your examples, especially where it concerns triggers and reaching out to others.
Okay. All right. It was wonderful talking with you today.
Today, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had another great conversation. As y'all can tell from the audio, I'm still having a little bit of technical difficulties with the new computer, but um, sometimes that's really what it comes down to is just going ahead and doing it anyway, even when it doesn't turn out anywhere close to perfect. So we had another great conversation this time with Jenna Ashlyn. Got to hear her amazing story of tragedy and overcoming abuse, and have the hope of this wedding and her big future as an author. So many great things. Uh, I'd say the things that came out to me were having the grandmother who didn't give up on her education or her life, and ended up becoming a nurse in her later years. I think that's a great example. We probably all have those examples in our lives, but sometimes you got to sit down and think about them, and realize there are people in your family's history or in your past where people by their example showed you that you're capable of doing big things. So in my case, it was the teacher in my high school, it was a scoutmaster It was my dad. So lots of great influences, and most of you have those. You just have forgotten about them. So maybe sit down and think about that. I also liked what you said about writing, how when she was working, she would just send herself short emails. And when she had time, she would journal. So between the two, she was able to create the content that would eventually become 2 books with 2 more on the way. And I'm hoping that gets some of y'all to thinking more creatively about how you can write, even though you don't feel like you have the time to write. And, maybe it's emails, text messages, a journal. Maybe you buy a little audio recorder. Maybe you get maybe you carry around some crayons with you. I'm not sure. Whatever you think might work for you. Um, so I took that, and then also how her fiance encouraged her to continue the effort on reaching out to publishers, and how she realized that if she pitched the smaller publishers, the regional publishers, she would have a better chance of getting accepted. And she ended up with a company that not only wanted to publish her book, but wanted to publish it bad enough to invest the costs. And trust me, it is expensive to have a book professionally edited, to have an artist create a wonderful cover, to submit it and format it, or in this case, have a publishing company submit it and format it and get it ready for print and print who knows how many copies of it. That's all expensive stuff. So then to find a company that's willing to invest in her, that's so cool. And then to know that she doesn't have an agent or a publicist. So many encouraging things from our conversation. I hope that you were encouraged as well. I do hope you will visit our sponsor, Blubrry, BLUBRRY.com, or as they tell me, when they started, they couldn't afford the E. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I do hope you will check them out, that we can get off to a good start. Also hope you'll visit my website, theblindblogger.net and wyexcuse.com. You can check out the other wonderful podcasts that are hosted by people with disabilities. You can connect with me through that website. If you're wanting to start a podcast, maybe you have a disability and you want to host a show. Maybe you're somebody who wants to bring attention or awareness to a particular cause that affects people with disabilities. You can just head over to What's Your Excuse. It's wyexcuse.com. Check out the shows page and send me an email. We have a wonderful host over there, Emily Trepanier, just released a new episode on shredding for gold. So I do hope you'll check out theblindblogger.net, wyexcuse.com. And if you want to do podcast interviews to share your story and promote your work, I hope you will reach out to me for that as well. I've been doing the outreach for myself, friends, and clients for over 9 years now. I know what it takes to get you on the top podcasts, radio shows, or to have you featured in blogs and online magazines. So again, theblindblogger.net, just click the online publicity tab. I do hope y'all are having a good day. I know that it's difficult with Omicron coming and COVID hitting us again for the 4th or 5th or 6th time. I do hope that you're staying safe, that you're being positive and encouraging, that you're finding ways to take those small steps towards your own big goal, and that you're celebrating whatever accomplishments you have had so far in 2022. All right, until next time, I appreciate you. I know you have a lot of other things you could do with your time, a lot of other shows you could watch or listen to, and I really do hope that we have encouraged you today. As I say, if Jenna can do it, then what's your excuse? All right, thank you now, take care. Bye. Too many times we stand aside and let the water slip away, till what we put off to tomorrow has finally come today. So don't stand upon the shoreline and say you're satisfied. Choose to chance the rapids, dare to dance the tide.